I'm Aryeh Schwartz along with Eli Horowitz, and welcome to the WNBA Insider Show. Each week we cover different topics important to the W. Using X's and O's along with key stats, we bring honest and critical analysis to this league. Eli, earlier this week, you ran a new coaches poll, reaching out to the fans, because we're all about fan interaction and fan engagement, asking the fans what their thoughts were, or to quote you, which WNBA coach will make the most impact in year one? Looking at the coaches in first year with a new team, that's a good caveat because you got Bill Laimbeer, who's not a first-year coach, and Dan Hughes.
I was like, how do I even word that? Because they're not first-year coaches. I was like, I don't know. That took me a while to write that.
Well, and also people definitely get stickler on you for that one. So well done.
I know. God forbid you make a typo on Twitter.
Yeah. So, I think the most interesting aspect of this was, let's just go break it down real quick. 43% voted Bill Laimbeer. 28% voted Nikki. 16% voted Dan. 13% voted Katie Smith. Are you shocked by that?
I'll be honest, I was a little surprised. I'm not shocked once I took a moment to step back. I thought Nikki Collin would be first, but taking a step back, Bill Laimbeer is a three-time champion, and as much as he's faced criticism for the early flameouts of New York in the playoffs, Nikki Collin has never coached a game as a head coach. Katie Smith has never coached a game as a head coach. And if you're comparing Laimbeer and Hughes, Laimbeer has more hardware. So I think that is probably about right, at least on the surface. Were you surprised?
I mean, all right. If you listen to the show and if you know who I am, I got my criticism of Bill. I think it's a tricky. As much as you well-worded it, it was still a tricky poll, and here's why. Bill Laimbeer is coming to the worst team in the league. Team getting the first pick of the draft. So, obviously he's going to have, if you're judging it on the percentage of importance of how much growth the team's going to have, yeah, I can hear what you're saying, and he's definitely a valuable person for that. But then, looking at Nikki, who's going into this team that, a lot of the people in the press have been high and mighty, and I will take a step back and play devil's advocate and compare it to Washington last year, getting Elena Del Don and people having high hopes for them. So I kind of get why Bill and Nikki, depending on how you're viewing impact, But the thing that surprised me more so, and I want to be very clear, I'm a big fan of Katie Smith. This is not a knock to her. I'm a little bit, only 3% difference between Dan Hughes and Katie Smith. And there's a big gap between the top two coaches and the bottom two in this poll. That's honestly what stood out to me the most. Dan Hughes coming to a semi-similar situation to Bill Laimbeer, but look at the positive feedback he got. Now, I ask you this. Do you feel that that's just because Bill's been in the league more recently, or didn't really leave the league, if you will?
I think it goes back to your first thing. Are we looking there's two ways to look at this, so let's clarify. One way to look at this is just who do we think is the best coaches? Like if we were ranking these guys 1 to 4, irregardless of what team they're coaching, what would they be? The second way to look at it is kind of what you were alluding to, is who is going to have the most impact given the situation they're in. So I guess which framework do you want me to operate in when I answer? You know what I mean? Because like you said, Bill Laimbeer with the first pick could take that team from 12th place to 9th place, and that would be more impact than Seattle if they went from just moved up one slot. But that's different from saying who's a better coach.
True, and I to say I don't think. It's a tricky situation. I think we just need to decide. But I do want to bring into it, working in that same belief and that same mindset of if Vegas moves up a couple seeds to 9th or whatever at the end of the next season, he made a huge growth. Let's not forget about Atlanta. I mean, whether or not Atlanta kind of fell off at the end of the season to lose their chances at the playoffs, Atlanta was one of the teams that didn't make the playoffs last year.
Yeah, and I think the thing with Lambeer is I do think the team will get better, very quickly because defense and rebounding keeps you in games. And as a coach myself, especially in the regular season, and this is a season that's going to be shorter, right, as far as the amount of rest you have in between games. A lot of teams are going to have 3-4 games in a week. And so what happens is people get tired, injuries happen. And so the things Lambeer emphasizes, I think, allows you to steal games where you run into a team that's maybe tired or they've played back-to-backs. And if you're defending and rebounding, you have a chance. So I feel like they will just be a lot tougher of a team right away. Nikki Collin, on the other hand, we've all spoken very, very highly of her, and I think part of that is because of the culture she's coming from in Connecticut. But I want to ask you, there is a lot of personalities on this team. You have Angel McCoughtry coming back. You have Renee Montgomery, who's a new face. You have Clarendon, who's kind of came into a different role last year. Then you have Tiffany Hayes, who had a breakout year and probably feels like this should be her team as far as scoring the ball.
Do not forget about someone I'm hyped on and runner-up for Rookie of the Year, Brittany Sykes,
Brittany Sykes, exactly.
Not a player to just be a pushover.
And she's going to want her shots, not to mention Breland. So my question to you is, as someone who's kind of spoken with Nikki and really followed Connecticut, is this going to be the cakewalk people are making it out to be?
No. To be clear, I haven't interviewed Nikki about this, and I haven't I've spoken to her. Nice little friendly messages and a few questions here and there. I don't think it's going to be a cakewalk. I mean, I think anybody who thinks they're going to be going into their first year as a head coach and in such a competitive professional sports league is going to be a cakewalk. I think. Okay, let's put it this way: she has a lot less work to do than Bill. So granted, Bill doesn't have to spend his time, trying to figure out his coaching style as far as a head coach and how he's going to handle personalities on the team. He's been doing that for years and years and years since the league's inception, essentially. So in the times where Nikki might be spending some time kind of fortifying and laying the groundwork of who she is as a head coach and the mentality that this team has moving forward, I think it's not fair to claim that that's going to be a huge hit on the team, because I don't want to say that they can have that piece kind of taken away, but the skill set is that much higher than of the Vegas team in Atlanta. Do I think it's going to be a cakewalk? No. I think Nikki is going to have to go there, and I'm not going to say she has to be good cop or bad cop. I think she has to lay down what the rules of this team are going to be. And when I say rules, I honestly, I mean more mindset. And is it what we've heard from the teams that have been successful in the league? Is it about the team first? I'll reference Minnesota Lynx having a bench player as their highest paid player last year. Yes, that's a team that has multiple MVPs on it, not taking MVP style money so that this team can stay together. Is that going to be the mindset that the Stars
Their bench player was the highest paid player?
Yeah. Gia Perkins.
Okay.
Gia.
That has to do with how long she's been in the league, right?
It has to do with how long she's been in the league. But keep in mind, there was, I'm not looking at the list in front of me right now, but there was a large gap between the starters and Gia.
Interesting.
But to me, that's kind of it's those little things. And it's, not every team is going to have a Maya Moore who has, a Nike deal, or, Rebecca Brunson who's starting her own, her own Belgian waffle shop. Not every team is going to have the ability for their starting five to say that, and I don't think that every team needs to do that. What I will say is she needs to take a page out of what her team did last year in Connecticut, which is it was a selfless team. It was all about the bigger picture and making that jump. And now, as much as people can say that Angel McCoughtry might have some attitude, and there is something to be said about that, what I want to jump back at is the maturity that I think you get when you take that time off. And I'm taking that from my own personal experiences in life, and I'm taking that from other players that I've spoken to. And I'll even reference this without even speaking to her, but Look at Elena Delle Donne, which has gotten a lot of press. When she took her time off from playing, and then you get back into it, you have a new focus and a new understanding because you were able to kind of get out of the clout of the game and of the talking heads of the game. This team is going to have a leader that's going to be more selfless than Angel McCautry than a lot of people are willing to give her credit for. And if that's the case, then I think that our 43 to 28% is going to be way off, and Nikki's jumping up to a full cakewalk and taking the whole thing.
I'm not saying, like, I don't mean that Angel McCautry would be difficult. What I'm just saying is that it's easier said than done to be a head coach. I
agree.
Again, not comparing to the pros, but I've been a high school head coach, and this past year was a college assistant, and the roles are just so different. And obviously, she worked very closely with Kurt, and I'm sure she just my sense of who Kurt Miller is and the culture they have. I'm sure she got to play a big role as far as game planning and on-court coaching. They seem like an organization that values that kind of synergy and including everybody. So I have no doubt in my mind she's prepared to do the job. I just think at the end of the day, at least from my vantage point, the assistant coaches are typically the ones the players go to vent and to establish more of a relationship with, whereas the head coach is that person that has to hold people accountable at all costs and kind of be okay being that one at the top. And, they say it's lonely at the top sometimes. Now, I can't speak directly for what the dynamics were in Connecticut. I'm not in that locker room, but I'm just saying that the difference of a head coach and assistant coach is very different. So I can understand why someone like Bill, who's been there, done that, and has 3 rings, is pulling way ahead of someone who's never coached a game as a head coach in the WNBA.
Well, and I want to get into that. And this is a topic that, maybe it's not so popular, and I'll tread lightly and I'll be as respectful as I can, and I mean no disrespect. Bill won some rings. Bill's done a lot of great stuff, but the league has shifted from there. And as much as I have confidence in him, and I 100% agree with a lot of analysis and analysts' take on he will be able to shift the culture of this team and he'll put a new face to it. And a lot of people are saying he's reinvigorated working for this team. But there has to be something said for just like, at a certain time, like we talked about with Diana Taurasi, at a certain time, her best years are behind her. And I'm not saying Bill's best years are behind him, but he did win 3 rings. And something has to be said. Nikki's coming into it with a fresh new hot take.
So just dive into that a little bit. Are you saying the game is kind of passed Lambier by, or that the style that worked when he won wouldn't necessarily work in 2018? And I think you're fair to ask those questions. So like you said, I feel like the cat's out of the bag. So what do you mean by that?
The latter, and similar to what you also said earlier, and he's going to keep teams in it. But I'm not asking whether or not he can be a coach that can keep teams in it. I'm asking, and this is the question I'm asking that in my mind I have somewhat of an answer to. Can he bring a team to that next level? And recent history has said no. And so I expand on that question, and I ask you and I ask everyone listening to ask themselves, does his coaching style give them the opportunity to get close, but not the opportunity, or not as legitimate of an opportunity to win championships as, let's say, it did years ago? And I'm talking strictly coaching style. I'm not going to get into, he had such a stacked roster back then and this, and that. I just think as far as his coaching style, he's a solid coach and he can keep his teams in there, and they're going to, be, again, his team was the number 3 team last year. And they have been a top 4 team in the past, 4 years, as far as record when they're going into the playoffs. So, a lot can be said about me being a complete idiot and wrong. And I'm here to hear it. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that, his style can be slightly outdated?
Look, I think we've seen it on the let me put it this way. On the men's side, in the NBA, the style has very, very distinctly changed. As far as a lot more small ball. Basically, if you're a 4 in the NBA, you need to be a 3-point shooter. And now even some 5s, a lot of centers are, spacing the floor. And you almost rarely have two traditional bigs on the court. Now, I don't think the WNBA is quite caught up. I still think you can play a Fowles and a Brunson, right, which are two bigs. You can play, whatever it might be, Miesemann and Crystal Thomas, though she can space, so that's probably not the best example, but you get my point. You still see teams playing traditional bigs. Camille Little and Brittany Griner, that's a better example. So I don't think it's quite caught up to the men's game, but I think it's trending in that direction, right? There's a reason Cheryl Reeve felt it was so important to have Rebecca Brunson be able to stretch her game. There's a reason LA has been so good, because Candace Parker is a big that can play like a guard, right? There's a reason Connecticut did well last year, where you had Jonquel Jones who could step out and hit the three. You had Alyssa Thomas who can put the ball on the floor. So I think the women's game is heading in that direction. And so I guess when I think has the game passed Bill Laimbeer by is that he seems, and again, this is not speculation. He has said on the record, for example, Asia Wilson is a 4. She needs a big center next to her. And in New York, Tina Charles pretty much always played the 4, right? He'd always have other centers around her. And that worked, and that got him 3 titles. What I question is, will that work in 2018? Or is it closed-minded to not think Asia Wilson could play the 5 or Tina Charles could play the 5? Of course, you can't play those bigs at the 5 the whole game, but I do think, just like Brunson needs to learn to shoot the 3, to just play 2 bigs that can't shoot from the perimeter makes it very difficult offensively. Now, you're going to defend and rebound, like we've said, so you can still win a lot of games and keep it close. But I tend to agree with you. I don't know if you can win a title in 2018 if you're playing 2 traditional bigs the entire game. I mean, even Phoenix starting to run into some problems, right? Where it was an issue with Camille Little out there not being able to really be a threat when they double-team Brittany Griner. So I think it's a fair question.
And I don't want to harp on it too long, so we're just going to move on. Dan Hughes, initial thoughts. I know, we don't know what he's going to do to this team. And we've seen a few moves, and we've seen him kind of in both of our opinions. We've talked about this. They've definitely made their bench better. I'm huge on Natasha Howard, and I think she could arguably get in there and play some with Stewie. And that could be a really interesting lineup as the 2 bigs, kind of talking about more flexible players at the big. What do you see in the future for this team? Because he got 16. Honestly, I thought he was going to get a little bit closer, a little bit more akin to Bill, considering the roster he's coming into.
This is another similar to Laimbeer. I mean, he's won at a high level in the past. Now, he doesn't have the accolades. Laimbeer has 3 championships. Dan Hughes, correct me if I'm wrong, but has not won a title. He had all those San Antonio teams. They definitely went pretty far. In 2008, they did go to the finals and lost. But his last years in San Antonio, they were 8-26 and 7-27, and his career record as a coach is 237 and 287. So, without giving too much of a hot take either way, I mean, he has lost more games than he's won. And I think that's just the facts. That's not any opinion. Now, he does have a lot of talent, right? Jewel Lloyd, Brianna Stewart, Sue Bird. I think the issue there is, this is a team that has enough talent to make the playoffs as they did last year, but their defense was not good. And so I think what you have to ask is, can he really be a game changer? Can he take this team that is a 6, 7, 8 seed type of team and make them a contender? And that's where I don't know. You know what I mean? Is he really going to bring something new and modern that's going to kind of unlock what they have? Or is he going to kind of play it safe and go back to what he's always done? Time will tell. Like you said, he stepped away from the game last year. So maybe he did learn. You know what I mean? Like maybe he'll come back with a fresh perspective. But again, we've said before on the podcast, like I'm just more a fan of seeing new people get opportunities. So that's why I think both of us tend to be a little bit higher on a Nikki Collin because of what we think she can be versus kind of what we've seen in the past of some of the more veteran coaches.
Just to kind of finish up on Dan, he did win, some of his accolades. He was a 2-time WNBA Coach of the Year, but again, that was in 2001 and 2007. It is important, I think, as far with them, to the Seattle Storm and Dan Hughes, to keep in mind the expectations that people had for this team going into last year. And in all honesty, I don't think it's a stretch to say how shocked commentators and people paying attention to the league were to see how bad Seattle played. And I mean that in the sense like, they didn't play that well, whatever. They were just, at no point did I see them get the right footing to kind of catapult them to where a lot of people projected them to go. A lot of people before the season, I was not one of them. I was excited about them, but a lot of people were high and mighty on them, saying they were going to be the young team that really jumped forward. And what we ended up seeing was Connecticut was that team that did it. So I think it's important that with them, yes, there's an obvious issue, but remember 2 years ago, they were like on the precipice of making that jump from being a team that has a couple vets who have two young great stars. Yeah.
But hear me out. Hear me out. To actually defend Seattle a little bit, okay? In 2015 was Jenny Busek's first season. They were 10-24. Then in her second season, they go 16-18. They make the playoffs. They lose to Atlanta in the first round. But I think because they made the playoffs in her second year, suddenly there were these huge expectations. But when you really take a step back, they were 16-18. That's an under 500 team. So I do think expectations going into last year were a little too high. Yes, people expect them to make the playoffs, but this idea that they were going to be like a contender, I think was a little misguided. So yes, 15-19 for them last year was a little bit disappointing. I think they should have been better, but I do think there was a bit of some false expectations that probably cost her job.
Yeah, no, I think that's a legitimate claim, but I mean, just looking at overall record, I mean, they essentially stood still from last year or from 2 years ago to this year, record-wise.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying that I think we have to be careful in the WNBA because 8 teams make the playoffs. What can happen is we say, oh, a team made the playoffs last year. They're supposed to be really good. I think we need to realize, like last year, Dallas and Seattle had losing records and made the playoffs. So I think we tend to inflate teams that made the playoffs. You got to really understand the teams that make those 6, 7, 8 seeds aren't necessarily great teams, right? And in most other leagues, you're not making the playoffs if you're 15-19, right?
Yeah. The last person on our list, Katie Smith, who lost the voting, and is honestly, I think out of everyone there, I wish a vote that she would have easily won is definitely the person who went into the hardest position, in my opinion. And would you agree with that as far as like overall position?
Yeah, because I mean, like Dan and Bill at least have the history and the accolades, and Nikki's coming into a really good situation, and she's coming from a Connecticut team that has positive vibes. Whereas New York, like, let's face it, like this has been an offseason of turmoil. Like, we're not ones to sugarcoat it. Like, James Dolan tried to sell the team. So right away, it's like, this team could have been moved. This team, like, it was all up in the air. And then they don't sell, but they move the team out of Madison Square Garden into Westchester County. So you almost feel bad for her because as a new coach, I feel like her whole offseason was kind of mired in all this front office shenanigans that really aren't her fault and are out of her control. And I think as a result in free agency, whether or not anyone will say it, like I have to imagine, I'm curious your take, I have to imagine all that was going on probably affected their ability to attract free agents or even make certain trades.
Well, I mean, let's put it like this. As far as I know, nothing's been released as far as the official re-signing of Tina Charles. So, like, she's made it clear as far as social media posts, appearances, and things like that she is returning to the Liberty, and that's where she wants to play. But they haven't even been able to sign the face of the franchise yet. So I think that says a lot. But more so, I 100% agree with that. I mean, imagine you're Katie Smith. You're handed this team that, you know, a month later, it's announced that, the owner wants to sell the team. Then you go through a couple months of limbo where no one really knows anything. Tell me how, as Katie Smith, you're supposed to go and preach the atmosphere that these free agents are coming into, the facilities, when they didn't even know where they were playing because it was clear part of the reason was the MSG moving out of MSG. So, like, to me, all you can do if you're Katie Smith and you want to kind of, show why people should join your team, the only thing you can do is be like, New York, New York, it's a heck of a town. And as amazing as that is, that's not going to just get players to go there. That will work on like Tina Charles, but that's about it. Most players aren't just going to drop everything and say, we're coming to New York with all these insecurities or with all these, non-solid factors in the team and in the administration. So for me, it was really hard. And that's why, I've been critical and I'll continue to be critical of their offseason moves because they didn't do much. And to me, if you're going to say, a lot of teams made moves to get better over the offseason, that's often what you do. The only move that was really made was signing a new coach. So by my accord.
Now, they did lock up Tina Charles, though. I mean, they court her, right?
Yeah, but I don't think all right, fine, yeah. They court her. I don't think the official contract has been signed. My understanding, I could be wrong. In all honesty, I don't even think that's that important of a detail. To me, the end of the day is I look at the biggest acquisition that the New York Liberty made this offseason was removing a coach who couldn't get them to the gate of the finals or couldn't get them on the court for the finals and putting in a new coach and hoping, that this coach can do something the last coach couldn't.
Yeah, and you know what? Maybe she can, but I would agree with you, at least for now, it's proceed with caution with them because, and my big thing with them, and again, it's not all Katie Smith's fault. She got dealt, some circumstance out of her controls, but it's not just the fact that they didn't make upgrades to the roster. It's just so many other teams did make moves. And so it's just hard for me to envision them being able to stay in third place when other teams, for one, other teams added players. Second, a lot of players didn't play last year who are impact players. Angel McCoughtry, Shanae Agumukwe. I mean, so I just see other teams moving up, and then they didn't add. And like you said, they're going to have a first-year coach, and she may turn out to be, one of the elite coaches in this game, but I still think for any first-year coach, whether it be her or Nikki Collins, there's going to be a learning curve. So that's why I've been saying I think New York, at least for next season, is going to take a step back and is actually going to have to fight just to make the playoffs, in my mind.
And I don't think that's a hot take. I mean, I think it's interesting because if we look at last year's top teams, right? It was Minnesota, LA, then New York, then Connecticut, okay? And out of all of those, and Connecticut's the only one that kind of worked their way up there, and you kind of often, people, I don't think, and myself included, give the proper respect to the New York Liberty because I just think about it in any other sport or with any other team that consistently is a perennial, top quarter of the league or top 5 of the league team is making the playoffs. That's the struggle that you want to have to a certain extent, right? That you have a team that is perennially making the playoffs, but at a certain point, kind of like let's say the Bengals for NFL fans, a team that's making the playoffs but can't make a win. So eventually at some point you got to pull the trigger. And a lot of people talked about that. And it ends up happening. So I think for New York, they were kind of in an interesting position where they were a top team that had a coach that, in my opinion, was on the hot seat.
Yeah. And I mean, look, there's only fortunate for all these coaches, they're going into situations that have potential, right? Seattle, we've talked about the talent that's there. New York, while we don't love it, they still have Tina Charles, and it's a team that finished third place. Nikki, we know all the talent there. And then even Vegas, yes, that's a rebuild. It's going to take a couple years, but you have the first pick in Wilson. You have Kayla McBride. And if they get back in that draft next year and add an Asia Durr, they should be pretty set. So I think the good thing is we'll be able to tell which of these coaches are really delivering, because I think it's not like an Indiana or even a Chicago where it's, man, they really got to do a lot of roster stuff to even judge the coaching. You know what I mean? I think we'll be able to tell, especially I look at a Dan Hughes in Seattle, man, we should be able to tell within one season kind of is this working out?
Well, folks, that's it for this episode. I'm R.A. Schwartz, along with Eli Horowitz, and it's been the WNBA Insider Show. Again, we use X's and O's along with key stats, and we bring honest, critical analysis. Tune in next week.